we're going to talk about something truly monumental. The incredible, sprawling, and absolutely fascinating story of how the Constitution of India, the very rulebook for the world's largest democracy, was actually written. I mean, really think about that for a second. That was the enormous challenge facing India's founders. This wasn't just about writing down some laws. It was about forging a national identity and a shared future for a brand new independent country. So how on earth did they pull it off? Well, an idea this big doesn't just pop into existence overnight. The dream of a constitution written by Indians, for Indians, had been simmering for a long, long time before it finally, piece by piece, became a reality. You can see the journey right here. The spark really ignites back in 1934, and just a year later, it becomes an official demand from the Indian National Congress. It took a while, but after World War II, the British government's cabinet mission plan finally set up the structure. And all of that led to this one historic date, December 9th, 1946, day one, the first ever meeting of the Constitution Assembly. And this assembly was huge. It kicked off with 389 members who were chosen to represent every single corner of British India and the princely states. So this wasn't some small group of guys in a back room. It was this grand body designed to reflect the entire subcontinent. Of course, after the partition of India in 1947, that number dropped to 299. But the task? Well, the task was still just as massive. So, okay, the assembly is all set up. They're all in the room. What do you think is the very first thing they do? Before they even touch a single law or government structure, they needed to figure out the why. What was the core philosophy, the very soul of this new nation they were trying to build? And just 4 days in, that's exactly what they did. Jawaharlal Nehru stood up and presented what was called the Objectives Resolution. And he summed up its purpose perfectly right here. This wasn't a law, it was a mission statement. It was the guiding star for every single debate and decision that was going to come later. And here's the amazing part. This resolution had some serious staying power. That philosophical blueprint, which they debated and finally adopted in early 1947, was so powerful that it was eventually adapted to become the preamble to the Constitution. You know, the famous first page that starts, "We the people of India." Now, you can't have nearly 300 people all trying to write one book at the same time, right? It'd be complete chaos. So the assembly did something incredibly smart. They broke the whole thing down. They created smaller specialist committees to handle different parts. You can think of it like teams of architects, where one team designs the foundation, another designs the rooms, and another the roof. And just look at who is leading these committees. We're talking about the absolute giants of the freedom movement. It makes perfect sense, right? Nehru, the nation's visionary leader, he's heading up the Committee on the Powers of the Central Government. And Sardar Patel, the great unifier of the states. Of course he's handling the rules for the provinces and the super important Committee on Fundamental Rights. And keeping the whole massive operation on track was the Assembly's president, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, as the head of the steering committee. Okay, so all these committees are hard at work making reports and recommendations. But now comes the most important job of all. Somebody had to take all these different pieces and stitch them together into one single, logical, legal document. And that was the job of the most famous committee of them all, the drafting committee. Just 7. That's it. Think about that for a second. The combined work of hundreds of representatives and all those different committees was now in the hands of this one small, elite team. Can you even imagine the pressure? And here they are, the 7 legal and constitutional experts who were tasked with writing that first draft. And while every single member was a giant in their field, the whole committee worked under the incredible leadership of its chairman, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. You know, just calling Dr. Ambedkar the chairman doesn't really do him justice. He's known as the chief architect for a reason. He was the one who pulled together all these diverse, sometimes even conflicting ideas. He infused the entire document with his vision for social justice and equality, and then he masterfully defended that draft line by line through months of grueling debate. And they worked at a furious pace. In less than 6 months, over 141 working days, they put together the entire first draft of the Constitution. I mean, that is just an absolutely Herculean effort. So the draft is finally ready, but the work is far from over. Now it had to be presented back to the full Constituent Assembly for the ultimate test, to be debated, amended, and finally, hopefully, approved. And this wasn't some quick rubber stamp job. They used this very careful, very meticulous process. The first reading was just to talk about the draft in general. The second reading, though, That was the most intense. It went on for months as members went through it clause by clause, proposing thousands of amendments. And then finally, the third reading was for the final vote, to pass the Constitution as a whole. And at the end of all that, this is the final tally. From that very first meeting back in 1946 to the day the Constitution was adopted, it took 2 years, 11 months, and 18 days, nearly 3 full years. That just shows you how thorough and dedicated everyone was.
Okay, this is super important, because these two dates can be a little confusing. The Constitution was officially finished and adopted on November 26, 1949. That's what we now celebrate as Constitution Day. But it didn't actually come into full effect until 2 months later, on January 26, 1950. And they chose that specific date for a powerful reason: to honor the 20th anniversary of the Purna Swaraj, or Complete Independence Declaration, from way back in 1930.
And so, this is what they created, the supreme law of the land, a document that not only sets up how the government works, but also protects the rights of its citizens. And fun fact, to this day, it remains the longest written constitution of any country in the world. Which brings us to a final thought. Creating the Constitution was this incredible moment in history, for sure, but the document itself isn't a museum piece. It's a living, breathing promise, a promise of justice, of liberty, of equality. And the real challenge for every single generation since is to ask ourselves, what are we doing to keep that promise alive?